Your monthly subscription box from postflybox.com includes all the materials needed to tie a dozen flies, along with some extra goodies. Over the last few years, jig streamers have rapidly gained in popularity, and there's good reason. A little bit of flash combined with a ton of motion make them all but irresistible, particularly to warmwater fish species like bass and panfish. This jig streamer starts with a size 12 barbless jig hook and a gold slotted tungsten bead. Feed the point of the hook into the small hole of the bead, then work the bead up the hook shank to behind the eye. You can then get the assembly firmly secured in the jaws of your tying vise. Make absolutely sure that the longer, squared-off end of the bead slot faces down. Double check this to ensure the bead rests correctly right behind the hook eye. Load a bobbin with the spool of white unithread, then get the thread started on the hook shank at the back edge of the bead. After taking a few rearward wraps, snip the excess tag off close. Then once again position your thread at the back edge of the bead. Pick up the spool of solder wire with your left hand and the bitter end pointing to the right. Place the end into the bead slot on top of the hook shank and take tight wraps of tying thread to secure it there. With the wire coil in hand, start taking touching wraps rearward with the wire, but behind your tying thread. After 5 or 6 turns, take a couple of wraps of tying thread to secure the wire, bring the wire parallel in line with the hook shank, then lift it up to break it off close. End with your tying thread hanging at about the hook point. Pick up one of the marabou feathers and find the side where the stem is most visible. Snip the stem right where it begins to dramatically decrease in size. Save the tip portion in a safe place as it will be used later in the tying sequence. Pick up the lower portion of the feather and strip off an inch or so of the lower fibers from the stem. Collect the fibers into a bunch, doing your best to keep the tips aligned. Place the clump on top of the hook shank so the fibers extend about 1.5 inches rearward from the tie-down point. Take tight wraps of tying thread to firmly anchor the marabou to the top of the hook shank right above the hook point. You can then lift the butt ends up and snip them off close. Take a few more thread wraps to lightly cover the snipped off butt ends, once again ending with your tying thread hanging at about the hook point. Corral the marabou fibers and use your thumbnail to tear off the stringy tips. This should leave you with a nice fluffy tail that's around a full hook in length. Pick up the barred rubber leg material and pull a single strand free from the rest, then fold it roughly in half. Place the midpoint against the near side of the hook at the base of the tail and take forward thread wraps to secure it there. Try to keep it bound down to the near side of the hook. Pull the forward pointing portion of the material back and to the far side of the hook and take tight thread wraps to anchor it there. Pick up the marabou feather tip you snipped off earlier and flip it over so the stem side faces away from you. Pull down the lower fibers to expose just the feather's tip, then snip that tip off while keeping the lower fibers swept back. Place the stem and a few of the swept back fibers against the near side of the hook and take tight wraps of tying thread to secure them there. End with your thread a little ways behind the back edge of the bead. Carefully strip about 1/2 inch of fibers from both sides of the lower end of the stem. Using your favorite hackle pliers, get hold of the stem and bring it up to vertical. Run the back edge of your tying scissors along either side to lightly fold the fibers rearward. Don't worry if you have a few that refuse to cooperate. Start taking forward touching wraps with the feather, preening the fibers rearward as you go. When you reach bare stem, use tight wraps of tying thread to anchor it to the hook shank, then snip the excess off close and take thread wraps to cover up the snipped off end. If you need to, use a dubbing needle to pick out any fibers that have been trapped during the wrapping process. Go back to the rubber leg material and this time pull 2 strands free from the rest and find their midpoint. Repeat the same tie-in procedure as you did before with the rubber leg material, anchoring it first to the near side of the hook, then to the far side. Now, pull a fairly ample slip of dubbing free from the packet. The fibers should be roughly aligned. Lay the approximate midpoint of the fibers against the near side of the hook. Take a thread wrap or two to lightly secure it, then pull the forward-pointing portion of the fibers down and back over the bead. With the bead completely exposed, take thread wraps to hold the dubbing back, like so. Pick up your whip finish tool and use it to do a 5 or 6 turn back-to-front whip finish, seat the knot well, and snip your tying thread free. A drop of head cement, here Sally Hansen hard as nails, applied to the exposed thread wraps behind the bead will ensure they don't come unraveled. A toothbrush does an admirable job of coaxing trapped dubbing fibers out and into a shimmery swept back collar on the fly. Snip the rubber leg material off so it's about the same length as the marabou fibers, then separate the double strands on either side of the fly. Your finished jig streamer should now look something like this. Remember that when fished, the fly will ride with the hook point up and with an enticing jiggy motion.